Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters, a short update on what's happening on the front lines in Ukraine and where the situation is going. We start with the most perspective direction for the Ukrainian side, especially with the Dnipro direction. Here, Ukraine is continuously expanding their bridgehead both around the area of Krinky, around the area of Pidstepne and Poima as well. And new thing that just happened in recent days, there is now additional activity being reported by Ukrainians around the area of Holopristin and this place here. Importantly, there are various maps that are going around showing how deep Ukraine has penetrated the Russian-controlled territory in this area. What we need to understand that while it is colored red on this map, this whole territory all across Dnipro pretty much is a gray area. Russians are trying to control, but they don't have the resources. The forces have been moved away from this direction. So when you see different maps that show how much Ukraine controls, firstly, we should always remember OPSEC. And for example, I am mostly basing my representation of the map on the publicly available deep state map, where I'm keeping the things that don't appear on the Russian Telegram channels a little bit of a secret. But more importantly, because it is a gray area, then what is being controlled can vary very wildly depending on the situation. We roughly know that Ukraine is active in certain areas, that there are certain troops that Ukrainians are getting along the front lines. And more importantly, if you want to know how the situation will develop, I made a nice video this week where I talked about 7 different areas in which Ukraine need to achieve significant dominance for them to transition from this tactical, advanced, reinforced raiding or early bridgehead to a more concrete action with the potential movement in depth on this front line. For right now, there are certain activities that are happening on the front line that are very positive for Ukraine. Russians have sent in additional reinforcements to the area. Some people saw the notification that additional 1,000 soldiers of Russians, together with additional 100 armored vehicles, are coming into the area, and they were like, "Oh my God, this is going to be really, really rough." Again, guys, the scale of this war is a lot larger. 1,000 soldiers, that is like a daily norm. It's thousands of people that are being killed or wounded on both sides every day. The armored vehicles are intense. 100 armored vehicles. Firstly, it's a great variety, whether it's tanks, whether it's infantry fighting vehicles or anything else. But more importantly, even those couple of tens of armored vehicles, it's maybe a couple of days. Because in this area here, we see that Ukraine is very, very active. We already hear from that reinforcements that were supposed to come in and make it really, really hard for Ukrainians. They're already crying on their Telegram channels that they are being bombarded by the FPV drones, that Ukrainian artillery, tanks, and everything else is working really hard in this direction. Russians are not having a good time over here. Ukrainians are continuously eroding Russian positions. Right now, whatever Russians are sending to this area is not having a great time. They're still holding on in a large sense thanks to the aviation support that they're having in the area. And obviously they still have troops on the ground. But this is gray area fights with limited resources that Ukraine has transitioned to this front line from the right bank of Dnipro. Let's transition towards Avdiivka, because this is where Russians are still putting significant efforts, despite the fact that weather right now has significantly degraded. It's a mud season in a full swing. It's not very nice area to be in. You don't want to be in these trenches. No one wants to be there. But Ukrainian defenders are bravely defending against Russians' onslaughts, and they're continuing assaulting. The biggest gains that Russians are having in this area, because the costs are atrocious, is that Russians have crossed the railway line, which is over here. They already have been spotted and confirmed fighting on the outskirts of Stepove. My sources tell me that right now is obviously not nice that Russians are getting to Stepove, but it's also not completely critical. and it's not completely confirmed that Russians in Stepove have been able to establish themselves on a more stable positions. But they're trying to do, they're losing a lot. If you've seen the numbers that were released in the last couple of days, then it was always well above 1,000 Russians casualties every day. Additionally, Russians were able to advance along the railway a little bit north. However, this is not as a critical direction. Obviously, it's not nice. Obviously, it's not nice, but it's not critical. The most critical point on this current position in the north is this place here, which is the chemical factory. And right now, the same situation that happened 2 weeks ago is still Ukrainian soldiers are bravely holding, and they are not allowing Russians to even properly approach the chemical factory, not even take or even fight on the territory of the chemical factory. They are still being held on the outskirts of the chemical factory, and that's one of the most important defensive points. In the southern direction, the most important one is that Russians were able to advance just a little bit north towards Severne. Severne is an important hold-up point for Ukrainians. Remember, the ultimate goal in this direction is Orlivka, which is the main kind of central logistics hub for Ukrainians to get supplies to Avdiivka. But for now, even Severne is not yet in any danger. Again, the fights are not easy. It's all hard. Ukrainians are also getting their casualties, but they're doing overall a great job, and they are not allowing Russians to advance. We also heard that Russians have started their additional offensive actions around Bakhmut, most importantly around Berhivka in the north. And right now there are reports that Russians are trying to attack towards Klishivka and Andriivka. And you might ask, by looking at this, right, if we zoom out, Russians also trying to do certain actions in the north, but they're very, very tactical right now compared to the directions that I told you. Again, fighting is happening all across the front line. The fact that we're covering maybe 2-3 spots on the map is only because what is important to know in a short period of time. And you might ask, Georgie, if Russians are attacking around Bakhmut, if Russians are attacking around Avdiivka, Russians are attacking around Marinka, we also hear some reports of Russian potentially trying to attack around Robotyne. Does that mean that Russians are actually having this huge successes everywhere, and that they are so much stronger than Ukrainian military? And the answer is complete no, because we looked at Zaluzhny's article like a week ago or so, and in Zaluzhny's article, he outlined very clearly, he explained that attacking right now is a very dumb idea because you're losing resources for little to no gains, and the amount of resources you're losing is enormous. So what I think, again, my hunch, though I've heard already today certain analysts are also reporting on this, so potentially my hunch was not wrong, is that Ukrainian command reviewed the situation. They said, let's not expend our resources in attacks. Let's go into the strategic defense. Let's allow Russians to grind themselves down if they want to, and we're just going to wait until we get new technology, until we get new capabilities, until we get more resources, until we get airplanes as well. This is supported by certain aspects. The first aspect is that I generally, absolutely certainly know that there are brigades in the backyard of the Ukrainian armed forces. There are brigades that Ukraine can engage if needs be. There are reserves. Moreover, there are forces specifically around Avdiivka, where the situation is the hardest, that are reporting that generally speaking, they're pretty okay with supplies, which is not something that I would be saying maybe even a year before. But I genuinely sometimes hear reports from Ukrainian armed forces that generally in some areas, specifically in this case with regards to shell numbers and ability of artillery support, they're saying that generally speaking, like there is a proper support that they need to execute on their tasks. That is telling me only one thing, is that Ukraine knows what it's doing. That's why when I started, talked about the Kherson region, because this is where, despite the strategic defensive position that Ukraine, at least as I see it, is taken, in this area, Ukrainians are seeing that Russians are being greedy, Russians are being politically motivated, and they're sending their forces away from Kherson, and they're not dedicating enough attention to this area. And Ukrainians are abusing that. They're able to send in reinforcement troops to try to undermine Russian positions. And if you watch the video about the 7 steps Ukraine needs to dominate this position, then as Ukraine is developing more and more capabilities, bringing more and more capabilities, right now Russians again there are crying about drones, are crying about the electronic warfare systems, and are crying about the lack of artillery support for them. Generally speaking, this means only one thing, that Ukraine is seeing possibilities right now that something can be built from this direction. Other than that, right now we're going into the strategic defense for the winter. And again, in my view, Ukraine is going to be waiting until new capabilities arrive, knowing that the planes will arrive only in late winter to spring. That's what's going to be. And again, something about planes that is important to say. Some people think that once the plane arrive, that's it. Most likely, first couple of planes will be in relatively small numbers. So at that moment, planes will be used mostly to support special forces of Ukraine for any kind of specialized tasks. So they would need to work with really high value target striking or something like this. Later on, as the number of the airframes will increase, at that moment Ukraine can start using them for regular troops, and generally we will see as Ukraine will develop their capabilities. We talked about Zaluzhny's paper on the stream, and I want you again to take one takeaway from the situation in Ukraine. Right now there is a lot of discussion, panic moding about how the situation is in stalemate. But if you read the article by General Zaluzhny, then what you need to take away is that Ukrainian command has a firm grasp on the situation. They know what is up. They know the problems of this war. Problems in war can be solved, and General Zaluzhny has a perfect vision to solve this problem. Some people are doubting the support from the Western powers. I understand that. That is a very good thing to be worrying about. It's a very good thing to start writing your direct representative about. But the thing that you're missing is that there has already been a lot of equipment dedicated to Ukraine. And not only it was equipment that was dedicated from the storage facilities to Ukraine, but more importantly, there were also commitments made on a long-term support to Ukraine. And again, not all allies are backing out from Ukraine. Baltic countries were going to stay with Ukraine. Poland is going to stay with Ukraine. Denmark is going to stay with Ukraine. Germany said that they will double the defense spending, the support for Ukraine. So it's not all bad as media right now is feeding it to you. They're trying to feed on your fear. They're trying to feed on your negative emotions. They're trying to destabilize your mental states. Breathe out, listen in, trust the Armed Forces Ukraine. Slava Ukraini, guys. I love you all, and I'll see you next time.